Welcome back, everybody, to the next session of the Denver Democracy Summit. We're going to be talking about democracy in action and the youth movements for social change that have been rocking our world and been so impactful in recent months and years. What do they all have in common? Well, all the people that are about to join you are helping democracies meet the challenges of the 21st century, from the local to the global level. So let's meet those panelists. We're honored to have with us today Jayathma Wickramanayake. She's the youngest senior official in the UN system, serving as the UN Secretary General's Envoy for Youth. Hi, Jayathma. Next, we've got Juela Hamati. She's the former president of the European Democracy Youth Network.
Hi, Ryan.
Then we've got Hasler Iglesias, who's youth coordinator for Voluntad Popular in Venezuela. That's a political party there, and he's the former leader of the student movement in the country. Hi, Hasler.
Hello, everybody.
And last but not least, we've got Tay Anderson, who's bringing us the local perspective. He's a member of the Denver Public Schools Board of Education, and he is a community organizer. Hey, Tay.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great that everyone is here. Let's dive right in. Let's start with you, Jayathma. I'm keen to get your global perspective. It feels like the UN has become this kind of global town hall, a much more inclusive ecosystem than just a set of political leaders that meet in a boardroom in New York. But tell us, what does that mean for young people? And in particular, maybe tell us how the youth climate movement that we've all been participating in, watching, reacting to, how is that changing the dynamic at the global level at the UN?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think last year was very special to the UN because we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of this institution, an institution that was formed 75 years ago to prevent another world war, an institution that was predominantly led by old white men, if I may put it that way, and an institution that was predominantly dominated by governments. And last year, there was an exercise to look at if this model really still fits the current realities of the world that we live in. So there was a global town hall. We brought together different parts of society, from private sector to civil society organizations to young people. And the overwhelming demand was very clear that states and governments are not the only players in the world today. They're certainly not the most powerful players in the world today, and that we really need to get the power back to citizens, stay true to the Charter of the United Nations, which starts with we the peoples. So moving away from multilateralism into multi-stakeholderism and creating more spaces for stakeholders in society, particularly for civil society and young people, to be part of these global conversations that will determine our future. Young people were the biggest group that participated in the surveys, in the competitions, in the dialogues, in the debates. And they were also the most optimistic group that took the survey. And their views about the future of the world was evidently more optimistic than that of the older generations. However, what is also an underlying thread in the learnings that we did last year is that there is, even though this optimism is there, there is a growing mistrust between young people and political institutions. And the reasons for that are the rising inequalities we see within countries and among countries, elitism, corruption, lack of transparency, unresponsiveness of public institutions, of political leaders, of our formal institutions. So this is pushing young people away from political institutions. And even if young people want to be part of the formal political processes, there are so many structural barriers that keep them away from that. So from voting age to minimum age to run for political office, to financial barriers, to the intersecting layers of discrimination that women, LGBTIQ people, racial ethnic minorities face in different countries. So the many movements, my argument is that the many movements that we see on the streets, from the climate movement you referred to what has been happening in Sudan, to Iraq, to Lebanon, to Venezuela, to many places, Belarus, Nigeria, in the recent months, is a manifestation of that frustration that young people have when it comes to accessing systems and institutions, and their need to really reform the current systems of governing in our countries and in our world in general.
Thank you. That is really a fascinating contrast between the faith and hope in one's peers and then the frustration at the institutional level. It's a great way to bring Juela Hamati in. You're right in the middle of an election campaign, so you must be feeling this right now, where you're trying to engage young people in institutions and formal processes. Are they buying it? How is it going? What does that disillusionment feel like to you in Albania at the moment?
Yeah, I completely agree with the previous speaker. I mean, as you said, we are in the middle of the campaign here, and one of the biggest challenges that we talk every day with my other colleagues is how to engage young people. But I won't be talking only about Albania here, because until December, as you said, I led European Democracy Youth Network, and I've had, the chance to cooperate with 230 people from 22 countries across Europe. So I also speak on behalf of them when I say that youth in Europe are disengaged and disillusioned. And but instead of just accepting it as a fact, we should also talk about it, talk why this is happening. And the thing is that we feel that the entire system is rigged against us, and no matter if we try to get to apply for a new job or to participate in the elections, we feel like there are forces in control or in power that are beyond us, but not only in politics, actually, in the economy, in media, and these kind of things actually make it impossible for young people to pursue the things that they want. And we often discuss about kleptocracy or high level of theft of state resources, but there is actually a direct line to be drawn between governments stealing from their citizens and youth feeling disillusioned. Because why would young people want to get involved in a system that is perceived as full of crooks and thieves? And that's exactly the case in Albania. And one of the biggest issues that we are dealing right now in my country, but in the region and also in a big part of Europe, is the brain drain, the youth migration. So young people are living in Western countries that are perceived as more democratic, with a lower level of corruption. And the reasons why young people leave our countries is because they don't think that we have a system that will reward them based on their merits and based on what they work. But they don't believe that they can get ahead here, basically. So why would young people want to start their business in Albania, for example, when their government is going to steal from them? So but the thing is that one thing is talking about it, one thing is analyzing it, and the most important and difficult part is addressing it and trying to fix it. And I think that we can only fix it by trying to encourage a high level of youth participation by tackling the corruption. And one of the things that is happening right now here in Albania is the foundation of the Transparency Academy, funded with the help of the USAID, which is going to try to reduce the level of corruption, which of course is going to have an impact in the whole system, I think. So yeah,
absolutely. I could not think of a better bridge to go to you, Hasler, where we're talking about rigged systems, corruption, people wanting to leave the country. It's almost a description of Venezuela. So tell us, what is keeping you there? How are you fighting? And what are the prospects for change, given how dire the situation has become in Venezuela?
Yeah, thanks. Well, we are, our generation, we are sons and daughters of a generation that didn't involve in politics, that they decided to keep away from the public issues. And that opened the path to authoritarianism to reach the power in our country. The situation has made us, or pushed us into politics. When I was a child, I never thought about involving in public issues. And when I told my mom, hey, I'm going to get into a student movement or a political party or a social organization, she was like yelling out, "It's not possible that my son is going to get into that." But I believe that's the first obstacle we as young people have to overcome, to involve in public issues, to understand that the decision that powerful makes affect us, and we need to have some kind of power or check and balances to make our voice be heard. In that situation, well, in Venezuela, we are having a space, a public space, every day more narrow or narrower each day. The different voices are suppressed and there is a lot of persecution. So besides the difficulty of getting involved into politics, we have the difficulty of fear and to be afraid of being a target of the authoritarian regime. So all these obstacles we have been working on overcome them, and we have found that young people are willing to participate in things that they feel that generate concrete impact. So, for example, we are working in communities. For example, I am an engineer, and we are giving vulnerable communities access to safe water in these communities. At the same time, we're working in a nationwide initiative. It's called the Youth Permanent Forum, and we have reached more than 500 young leaders from all over the country, in a country that lacks electricity and water and domestic gas and gasoline. We are putting together young people to talk about how looks the country we dream of, and starting to organize to make it true. I believe that organization is the foundation of any initiative, and we as young people need to organize, need to meet other young people, need to discuss and debate our ideas, our visions, our ideologies in order to promote a more kind world, a more kind country, and a country that allows young people to be whatever they want to be and not to force them to remain what the system wants of them.
You guys are all the perfect panelists because now we talk about organizing, and that's exactly when I wanted to bring Tay into the conversation. Tay, you're doing that practical work just like Hasler in your community. What sort of inspirations and connections do you draw from these movements around the world? And I guess I'd also throw in that, you know, a lot of the world has looked to the US as this democratic beacon. And in this last 12 months in particular, a lot of us have started to realize, like, hey, actually, there's centuries of deep structural inequality going on in the US. There's a lot of problems with the democratic system and institutions itself. So with you being surrounded by all of that, how do you move forward in your local activism?
Yeah, a lot of people look to the United States of America thinking that we are, the land of the free and the home of the brave. And although we may have different liberties than other nations, I will tell you, as a Black man in this country, we are not the perfect union people think we are. People think that racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and so many more things have, disappeared over the last couple of years, mainly after the election of President Barack Obama, after the election of Vice President Kamala Harris, and those things are significant to our history. However, they did not cure the issues that we are currently facing within our country. That's why you saw throughout the country this past summer, our cities were on fire because we had to stand up to racial inequality and injustice that were going on among African Americans in our system. We see right now the discrimination against Asian Americans because of the pandemic and because of the rhetoric of our former occupant in the White House. We are seeing right now an uprising of young people saying we're no longer going to be able to sit here and have a future that we are forced to recreate when we can help create the future that we will live in. And now we are seeing at record numbers young people, saying we're done with allowing old guards to continue to lead us forward. We have people like Cori Bush in the United States Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Joe Neguse. We have a new generation of leadership heading to the United States Congress, but we also have folks like myself doing the work at the local level on school boards or different county boards and commissions, because we are tired of having a system where we have to get out into the streets and complain. The images of America you saw this past year were horrendous. You saw an insurrection take place on our Capitol. You saw us have an election where there was so much uncertainty around the election and the results after it for weeks and months to come. That's not who America is. America is a shining beacon on a hill, but it can only be that, or it won't be that until we actually live up to the words in our Pledge of Allegiance, which means liberty and justice for all.
I just want to take a second to acknowledge the excellence of all of you and the people you work with around the world. Going back 20 years, I once led student unions in Australia as well. And you just all go so much further, faster, better than we were ever able to do at that moment. So I just wanted to say that for a few seconds before we move on to the next questions. I'll bring in a question from our audience because I think that's the way young people like to do it. It shouldn't just be about us or me. Davin from Washington, D.C., he asks, how important is the funding of civil society organizations to be effective in promoting and building democracy? And there are follow-up questions from other people as well about where do you get your funding from and how much of an issue is that? Like how much is it all possible now because of digital platforms, and how much is funding still a barrier? Maybe I'll go back to you, Jayathma, and we'll work our way through again.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think that's a very important question because we see a lot of clapping of hands, when young people speak or when they're talking about their bravery and their activism. But when it comes to concretely supporting young people through dedicated resources, we don't see that rhetoric translating into action. So at the UN, I'm the youngest senior official at the UN, and the only office that works as a platform to bring together young people and be an interface for young people. And my office is not even funded by the UN. I have to raise funds from even to pay my own salary, to pay my staff, and to support the young people that we work with. And I think this is a really good reflection of, all the rhetoric that is there that are not being translated into commitment.
Do you get support for that? Or do you literally have to go out and knock on doors of corporations? And
I do get some support from the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, who would talk to governments to contribute funding to the programmatic activities we do. But a lot of that happens myself, reaching out to donors and foundation philanthropies and getting that funding so that we can support the young people that work with. But this is not just my reality. I think I work with all 193 ministers responsible for youth affairs of the UN member states. Ministries of youth are usually the most underfunded ministries in countries. It is usually given no importance, coupled with ministries like sports or culture, where majority of the funding goes into these other sectors and not really into establishing youth councils or empowering grassroots youth organizations. And this is a huge problem. And this is something that I'm really raising my voice within the UN and also within governments when I work with political leaders as well. Even when there are dedicated funding for youth, one of the challenges that I've found is how donors and big institutions, for an example, like the UN, determine the criteria that we fund often does not sit well with youth organizations, particularly grassroots youth organizations. In 2018, we did a study which is called the Independent Progress Study. And there we found that youth organizations who are operating in the field, 90% are unregistered, voluntary networks of young people coming together to fix problems in their communities, operating under $5,000 a year budget. And of course, this is a global number. But when it comes to institutions providing funding, when you go to a donor application to apply for a grant, they will ask for your registration documents, your, electricity bills, your board of directors, and all of this information that often youth organizations working in communities do not have. So there is a big difference between how the institutions who have the resources view funding models versus how youth organizations can actually apply for that funding. So we are advocating for sort of seed funding, flexible financing for unregistered youth organizations, for them to be able to use that funding in a way that makes the most impact in their community. But still there is a huge gap when it comes to, translating those commitments into action. And I'm really glad that the audience brought forward that question.
Yeah.
I think maybe Hasler? just to add one thing, I think that just it also is a testament to this misconception that often institutions have, that young people are not experienced enough or are not experts enough to take funding and implement it in an effective way, which is really not the case.
Absolutely. Now, in Venezuela, the economy is barely functioning. I can only imagine the depth of the challenge of finance. What is it like trying to make a movement happen there?
Yeah, well, it's tough. As Jayathma said, I think that funding is the backbone of any social initiative, even if an enterprise initiative. And well, here in our economy that has shrank year after year with a growth of the economy in negative terms for at least 5 years, it's impossible to receive funding from the private sector, which is the only legal way of funding social initiatives. For example, Juela talked about the support of USAID. Here in Venezuela, it's illegal to receive funds from USAID and from other international organizations. And therefore, the persecution, not only to political leaders, but also to social leaders, to social organizations, has been rising in the country. We saw, for example, last month, 6 leaders of an organizations that fight or helps HIV patients in the state that is neighbor with Colombia. They were in jail for more than a month just for receiving humanitarian aid like medicines and health care items to support these HIV patients. The same thing has happened with people and social leaders who work with women, with children. We have here a lot of, I call it public dining rooms, places where children can go and receive food for free. And these public dining rooms have been also persecuted. Their bank accounts have been closed. So here I believe that the challenge is double. It's not just find funds, but also be able to use them without falling into the hands of the regime that wants to oppress any kind of help that we can receive. And in the practice, civil society in Venezuela is only depending financially of international organizations, of the help we receive from the UN, for example, UNICEF, and the United Nations Program for Development is doing a great job here. Also, the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization. But there are a lot more initiatives, the European Union, the United States, Canada, different countries that has to help kind of under the table because in the laws of the country, it's illegal to receive funds from foreign countries and foreign organizations.
Juela, can you jump in there? Because I know that countries on the edge of the EU getting increasingly frustrated that the EU isn't engaging and moving forward membership negotiations. Funding doesn't work simply. You see countries like Serbia turning to China or Russia for vaccines, for example. Do you find that young people or youth organizations get support and engagement from institutions like the EU?
Yeah, especially for countries which are trying to join the European Union, like Albania. Yeah, they do focus a lot on the youth here. But of course, that this is a two-way street. We should also play our part. Funding is not enough. We should also turn them into the right direction. But I wanted to say that the European Democracy Youth Network, which I used to lead until December, receives the majority of its funding from USAID, and of course funding is very important. But I also wanted to say, I heard you saying a few minutes ago that you used to be also part of a students organization, right? And you said that you are very proud today that the change is happening faster and the impact is higher. And I think that one of the main reasons why we are, let's say, more successful nowadays is because of technology. because thanks to this globalization, it's very easy for us to find out what's happening in the US or in Venezuela or in any part of the world. So the impact of technology is very big, and that's why I think that funding is important, but it's not. But we can also make it without funding, because thanks to social media nowadays we can organize campaigns for free on social media, call our friends, or create an event, or just play our part, and other people will follow us. If they support us, they will follow us. So we will raise awareness in this way without spending any money or not a lot of money. But of course funding is important, but we can also make it without it, thanks to technology.
Absolutely. Tay, maybe let me join up those finance and technology points with you. We've got a question from a Korbel graduate student. I don't know their name, unfortunately, but they ask, given the sheer amount of information that we're bombarded with today and the increasingly short attention spans we all have and the need for instant gratification on all the platforms, how does the social movement today maintain momentum? Maybe it's easy to get the message out there, but how do you maintain the momentum and then turn that into some kind of policy change once you've got all of the attention and momentum?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people have to do is by making sure that there are individuals that care about sustaining the momentum past Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I think we see in the United States, there are a lot of Instagram activists where folks only care about social justice or change in their communities when it benefits them to get a couple hundred likes on Instagram. And we have to be able to go past that and say, cool, like that's fun and that's cute or whatever. We actually need to start putting in systems and working with those in elected office to start changing the things that we want to see changed. Prime example in Colorado, our Leslie Harrod, state representative here in Denver, Colorado, she heard directly from the concerns over this summer around policing in America. So she led the first comprehensive police reform bill since the George Floyd killing, and we were able to get that passed with bipartisan support and without having to give up any of the meat of the bill to adhere to what Republicans or those on different side of the aisles wanted to change into. And so that's something of taking that change from the streets and social media to the House of Representatives in Colorado. And that's the same thing we did in the Denver public schools. I heard directly from our students that they did not want law enforcement officers in their buildings anymore post this summer. So what we did is we took them out and we led a conversation and a dialogue with our communities, with our students and with our educators, and really pushed forward for a system that did not include the over-policing of our schools anymore. And that was, again, taking it from the streets, from social media to a legislative action. And that's how I believe these movements can be sustained, is really by making sure you get people in power that really care about these issues. And then, I mean, to the funding question, we've learned in our society, at least in America, we don't need $1 billion or a couple million of dollars, or a couple hundreds of millions of dollars to sustain a movement in the streets. We know how. All we need is a megaphone, and I actually have mine on my desk. All you need is a megaphone, and we just organize a crowd together, and it's free because we in America we have the ability to assemble under our First Amendment rights. But that's not the same in every country, and so we definitely have a privilege in order to do that because of our founding fathers.
Great. I'll open it up to the other panelists on that question of maintaining the momentum and converting attention into real change in society. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree with Tay. Not every young person, not every community has the privilege to be able to access internet or to even peacefully assemble and gather in one place. There are countries where protesting is illegal, where campaigning is illegal, But I've seen, for an example, in the youth climate movement, this cross-country, cross-continental solidarity. So when young people in, say, Russia or China were unable to protest, young climate activists in the United States were giving them their social media platforms for those youth voices to be heard, or their concerns to be brought into the public. So I think one of the unique, and Ryan, you were talking about how today's youth movement is perhaps a little bit different from when the times that you used to be a youth leader. I think this kind of cross-border solidarity, as Juela mentioned, that brought together to us by globalization is also one factor that kind of keeps us pushing and keeps us going. But I do agree with Tay that we need allies also within institutions for us to bridge what is happening down in the streets into what is happening in the institution. So we need young people out there protesting, demanding for that change, but we also want young people to run for political office. We need legislation, the legal barriers removed that says in certain countries to be able to run for office, you need to be 35 years old or 40 years old. We still have those legal restrictions in 64% of the Interparliamentary Union's member countries. So we need those restrictions removed so that young people can not only raise their voices out there in the streets, but also within parliaments, within the Congress, within the Senate, within our municipal leadership, as mayors, as governors as well. So I think a very important point of having youth leadership on both of these areas and having them bridged together as well.
Great. Hasler, can I bring you in now? Sorry, I saw you raising your hand and I missed it.
Yeah, don't worry. Yes, we have talked a lot about this of kind of going on after a huge trigger event. And we have seen some Latin American youth movements that they go to the streets, they protest, they put some issue into the public agenda, but afterwards they are unable to make this a reality, to convert it into a law or an act or a policy in some level of the government. So, and also I believe that our generation is kind of into a cause-led activism. We make the people go to the streets or participate around a cause. But after kind of a few weeks or months of activity, it goes kind of like a low tide. And well, in Venezuela, we have identified this kind of cycle where you have big momentum and activism and participation. But afterwards, you need to have a group of organized people that maintain and build the strength for the next momentum. And usually these big activation movements occurs afterwards a trigger event, a decision of the government, some event that occurs in worldwide or nationwide or in a region that makes people want to go to the streets and express. So I believe the challenge is not just remaining to this cycle of activity and rest, but also include organization to be able to reach parliaments, town halls, social organizations, boards, universities, etc., to be able to make the change occur and not just raise our voices.
Absolutely. We've got about 5 minutes left, so maybe I'll turn to one last question and then also give you the chance to add in sort of final thoughts, about a minute each. And the question is around an idea that was put in my climate panel yesterday. And a couple of the speakers wouldn't classify them as young, but very committed to youth. They talked about the importance of intergenerational democracy. And by that, they meant young people who might not be able to get into parliament, the people who can't yet vote, and also the people who are not yet born. And the importance of that for us building a longer term sustainable future. And they weren't specific about how it might work, but I wanted to get your reactions to that idea of intergenerational democracy and any final thoughts. Maybe let's go through the original order. I'll go back to you, Jayathma.
Thanks, Ryan. Yes, I think definitely we need intergenerational partnership if we are to bring about sustainable change. We do not have a lot of statistics or evidence to show that in the political arena, unfortunately, because there's only less than 2% of world's parliamentarians under the age of 30, even though the world's population, half of the world's population is under the age of 30. But there are interesting studies that have been done in the private sector. The Forbes magazine did this study study in 300 different companies where they studied the productivity of teams that are only comprised of young people, teams that are only comprised of older people, and teams that are comprised of intergenerational groups. And the intergenerational teams performed 40% more than any of those isolated teams, which were divided among sort of age lines or generational divides. And this really speaks to, I think, the experience, the wisdom that the older generations bring, coupled with the idealism, the creativity, and the lived experiences, and the more future-looking and the forward-looking aspirations that young people have towards their future. Many people ask, why are young people active? Why are they on the streets? Why are they always complaining about these issues? And sometimes it's not because we have another choice. If today the Secretary General issued a statement that almost all the commitments that national governments have made in terms of climate change are a red alert. None of them are committing enough so that we can achieve the targets set out in the Paris Agreement. So as young people, we cannot sit here and wait for this planet to be exactly. We cannot sit here and wait for the planet to be ruined, because we are the ones who will live with the repercussions of the decisions that are being made today by our political leaders. So I think
I have to cut you off, though. I got to get in the other speakers. Juela.
Yes, just to say, share the power. To the political leaders, I say, share your power.
100%.
Yeah, I just wanted to also continue on that line and say that, we should not wait for other people to leave the seat so we can take it. We should take it from them. And besides talking about it, I always think that we should try and push laws or regulations that would fix things that we don't like. And only us can fix things that we don't like. Only us can change things. So what we should do and what we can do is maybe just like we have women's quota in many countries, we should have maybe youth quotas, in order to encourage the youth participation, so that young people will see that, political parties are serious about it and that they really care about our generation.
Thank you. Hasler.
Yes, I would say that, we have we have to become conscious of the power we have. Many times young people hesitate about hesitate. So how far do we go? How many changes can we make? How many people can we reach? And the experience has shown us that when young people believe strongly, firmly in an ideal, in a vision, an organized read, we are able to impact many people and reach many things. So as a reflection, I believe that we as a generation have to keep becoming more and more conscious of our own power and the power we can develop if we act together in order to have a better world at the end.
Thank you. And Tay, the final word to you.
Yeah, we got to be able to create a future that folks are no longer having to say we have to pick up different pieces and put them together, but understanding they can build off the progress that we've made together as a society, because there's a new generation coming, and one day all of us will be considered old people or elders, and so we have to be ready to pass that torch on to the next generation and to give them the supports that we didn't have. And that's something that's going to be key about making sure that this is intergenerational and it continues to sustain by giving them those seeds to plant the next tree. So we got a lot of work to do, but it's going to be possible.
And I promise you it happens. One day you wake up and you're like, what? How did I become this old person? But I want to thank each of you for being an inspiration to your own communities and also to the audience, because I know that that is the reaction they're going to give once we switch off this panel. Thank you so much for all of your input. The next session is going to continue on the theme of civic engagement, so stay around for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.